Hi everyone, I'm Benjamin Mack, and today I'm going to show you how to make your own bias tape. One thing we found is everyone's making masks right now, and so there is a shortage on elastic and even on packaged bias tape. So it's time that we learn how to make our own. To make your own bias tape at home, there are a few essential tools that you're going to need. First one is a rotary cutter. And if you go onto moodfabrics.com and just type in rotary cutter into the search field, you'll see all of the options come up that we have available. You're also going to need a cutting mat, so go and check those out if you don't already have one at moodfabrics.com and see what we've got in stock. For this demonstration, I'm going to make some bias tape, but I'm also going to put it to use. So a lot of people have been making masks, but there's shortages of elastic and it's impossible to get packaged bias tape. So all of these things, if they run out of stock, I'm going to show you a way that you can make good with fabric that you've got lying around. So I've already partially made my mask. You can always go back and have a look at one of our previous IGTV tutorials and you can see how I made that. And now I'm going to get into making the bias tape to finish it off. You can make bias tape out of any fabric. It's going to work best, I think, with a woven fabric. And you don't want the fabric to be too stretchy already because actually the bias grain itself is going to be quite stretchy. So we want to make this as least challenging as possible. So with a woven fabric, you've got three grains. You've got the crosswise grain, you've got the lengthwise grain, and then you've got the bias grain, which runs at a 45-degree angle to the other two grain lines. So we're going to be cutting on the bias grain. And to get started, I've got my piece of fabric here. You can start by following along with the selvage, or if you want to rip your fabric, then fabric will rip along the grain, along one of the grains. So using a ripped edge or just the selvage to begin with, you can then take a ruler, and if you have a ruler that has 45-degree lines marked on it, that's going to be fantastic help for you. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line up, you can see here I've got the 45-degree line on there. I'm going to line up that 45-degree line with the ripped edge of my fabric, and then I'm going to take my disappearing ink pen. You can use whatever you like to draw this on. Just make sure that if you're using another type of pen or a pencil, that it's not going to be something that is going to run and seep into the rest of your project when the project gets washed. So make sure that it's something that will disappear or remain permanent. The lines that you're drawing, they're going to end up being on the cut edge of the bias tape, which is going to end up being on the inside of the project. So it's not going to matter too much if you can still see the lines that have been marked. Okay, so I start off by just getting one line started. And I'll go all the way along this piece of fabric. So I started off with about a ½ yard of fabric. I've cut it down to a slightly smaller square, but about a ½ yard, that should probably be good to get started. And in the middle area of that piece of fabric, you'll end up with the longest strips as opposed to down at the corners. And next what I'm going to do is draw in another line, and I'm going to go with a line 2 inches away. So what you want to make sure of is think about what width do you want the finished bias tape to look like when it's on the project. If it's a bias binding, then you want to think about that. If you're using bias to trim the inside edge of a neckline, for instance, that's something that I'll come back and show you in a future video, then you want to think about the finished width of your tape. So I want the finished width of my tape when it's folded in half and is binding the edge of my project to be ½ inch, which means I'm going to now create a strip that is 4 times that amount. So for my finished single fold bias tape to be ½ inch wide, I'm going to need to have a 2 inch wide strip to begin with. And I just keep working my way along, lining up my ruler. This ruler is 2 inches wide, so it makes it super easy. Keep going along. And as you get closer to the corners, a piece of bias tape this long is probably not going to be that useful. I'm going to use some on the edge of my mask, so I probably can squeeze one more bit out here. But when you start to get to the really short lengths, you can just stop. So I'm going to finish drawing out these lines, and then I'm going to come back, and with my rotary cutter I'm going to start cutting out my strips. Okay, all my lines are marked out, and now with my rotary cutter, I'm going to roll along. Now, you can use a ruler to guide you with this. If you have a metal ruler, that's going to be better than something plastic. But if you only have a plastic ruler, that will work just fine. You just want to be careful not to catch into the edge of the plastic. Or you can go freehand like me. I like to live on the wild side, so I'm going to give it a go and see if I can keep my hand steady enough to stay on the line. Be very careful of your fingers, please. Stay alert. And as I'm doing this, I'm pushing down, not forward. So I'm rolling forward, but putting weight down onto the fabric. So that little piece is going to be a scrap. We don't need that, but this next piece is going to be long enough for part of my mask that I'm going to be making using this bias tape. So I just keep going along and cutting out these strips. Trying to stay right on that line. If you go off just by a very, like a slither, then it's not going to be the end of the world, but try and be as accurate as you can be. So that's what my strips are going to be looking like. And then once I've cut everything out, I'm going to go to the iron and I'm going to fold these to create the actual bias tape. So when I do that, I'll be folding in like that and in like that, pressing it with the iron and creating a finished and functional bias tape. We are ready to press out our bias tape. Now, if you have a disappearing ink pen or something else that's not going to be too permanent, what you can do right now is draw a line exactly down the center of your bias strip. So get that sitting nice and straight. And my strip here is 2 inches wide, so I'm going to draw a line 1 inch in. And I'm going to use this line that I'm drawing 1 inch in as my guideline for where to fold the cut edges of my bias strip. So I've done that, and then what I'm going to do now is fold in the cut edge to that line in the center. Now, you could eyeball this as well if you want to. You might have that, that genius skill of just being able to see measurements. So whatever works best for you. So as I am folding that in, I'm being very careful to not hit my fingers with the point of the iron, because you are going to be working quite closely to the iron with this. So be careful. And I'm just going to continue to press along, keeping that as straight as I can keep it. So I'll keep going all the way to the end. Then I'm going to come back and do the other side as well. So let that cool down. It's quite hot at the moment. So I come along to the other side and I fold into the middle again on that side. And then I just do the same, continuing all the way along to the end. So the two cut edges are meeting in the middle. Okay. And then once that's done, you can use a little bit of steam here as well if you want to, and just get a nice strong crease. So I'm going to go back over that in a minute. But once that's done, you'll have your bias tape that will look like this from the inside, and it's going to look like that from the outside. And then we're ready to start to fix this onto our sewing project. I have my bias tape cut here, and I have my part-made mask. So I wanted to show you a way that this bias tape could be used in a project. So I thought, what's the best thing to show right now? And probably, you know, making a mask is something that everyone's having a go at, but there's a shortage of elastic. It's not easy to come by elastic all of a sudden. So who would have thought? So we're making our own bias tape, and I'm going to show you now how you can use this bias tape to finish off the mask. Now, I did mention before, we did a tutorial on IGTV a little while back showing you how to make masks, and on that one we used elastic. This time round, I've made a few changes. So I still cut out the same size piece. It was 6 by 9, and rather than stitch it the way that I did in the previous tutorial, go back and take a look. I just put the two pieces together, I sandwiched them together with a zigzag stitch all the way around. So you can see on the edge there, we've got a zigzag stitch just holding the two layers together. Then I went ahead and did the pleating, just as we have in the previous tutorial. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some bias tape to finish along the long edges, and then I'm going to use some bias tape to finish the short edge, and also to create the loop that would go back around behind your ear so that you can wear this. So when you're taking your bias tape, we want to, I'm going to save my two longest pieces for the ear loops. Taking the bias tape, we want to cut it to the right length. Now, I always kind of veer on the side of caution with this, and I always cut it just a little bit longer than what I actually need it to be. So this is the length that I need, but I'm going to cut just a little bit extra. I can always trim it off later, but if for whatever reason things don't go to plan and you're stitching and then you end up being just like 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch too short at the other end, you kind of have to start again. So I'll take my marker pen. I'm just going to mark a little bit outside. I'm going to go with an extra 1/4 of an inch at each end. Okay. And these are both going to be cut to the same length, so what I can do is actually sandwich them together. The fabric's not too thick, so this will work. Sandwich them together, just cut there, throw away the scraps, and come to the other end and cut along there. Now the way that I'm going to apply this is I'm going to be folding the bias tape around the edge. So I want to just fold out this from for the pleats. I don't want to catch any of the back of one of the pleats into what I'm about to stitch. So lining up the raw edge, or the zigzagged edge I should say, to the middle of my bias tape. And I'll do that the whole way along. And then I'm going to fold my bias tape over, and I'll put some pins in to hold all of the layers. Just like so. And I'll keep going along there. Just make sure that the raw edge of your fabric, or the zigzag edge of your fabric, is right up inside the fold or the crease of your bias tape. So I'll continue pinning along there. Then what I'm going to do is stitch, and I'm going to stitch close to the edge, not too close to the edge, because as I'm doing this, what I want to make sure of is that I'm catching the folded edge on the outside, but I also want to be sure that I'm catching the folded edge on the inside. So I'm probably going to come in, say, about 1/8 of an inch, and I should be okay with that. I should be catching both layers. This should also be equal on each side, as long as we've measured out right. So just always be double checking your measurements when you're doing this. Okay, we're ready to apply the bias tape down the sides of our mask now. You can see here I've just gone and done a stay stitch about 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch from the edge, just to hold the pleats in place. It's going to make it a little bit easier to handle. I've done that on both sides. Now, what I'm going to show you is two different options that you have. One is to take your bias tape and find the middle of your length of bias tape. I've left this quite long. This is about 20 inches right now, maybe a little longer than what I need, but I can always adjust that later. So find the middle, just fold it in half. Find the middle, put a pin there to mark it. And then I want to place the middle of my tape in the middle of my mask, like so. And I'm going to encase the edge just like I did before. So wrapping that around, pinning it in place. And then that's going to give me these lengths here, and I can use this to then work out what adjustment I need for it to fit comfortably behind the ear. And I can either tie it off if that works, or I could stitch the two ends together and create a loop that will just go around behind the ear. Okay, so we're going to have something that looks like that with these ties. Now, the other option that I'm going to show you is where we start at the bottom of the mask, and I'm going to start at the end of my bias tape. And I'm going to wrap that around. And I'll pin all of that in place. And then I'm going to continue to stitch all the way to the end of this long strip. Then I'm going to have a fitting, and I'm going to fit it around my ear and bring the loose end back to the bottom of my mask, and then I'm going to stitch it in place there. So there are two different options that I'm going to give you there. Now, as I'm stitching, I'm going to start at the end of my bias tape, matching up the two folded edges together. I'll start with a back stitch, So this first side that I'm doing is the one that's going to have the ties. And then as I'm getting close to coming up to the mask, I just want to make sure that it's in there properly. Take the pins out as you go. Now I'm encasing the end of my mask. And then I will continue to sew all the way to the other end of the bias tape, keeping the two folded edges aligned. Finish with a back stitch. Okay, so there's one side of my mask with the tie ready to go. And now on the other side, like I said before, I have a long piece to start, and then on the side of the mask I've got just enough to cover the edge of the mask. I've allowed a little bit of an overhang of about 1/4 of an inch here, just to give me something extra to work with when I come back to attach the other end to the front of the mask. So I'm going to stitch this one closed now in the same way that I just did for the first strap concept, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how we can get all of this finalized. Okay, so I have my mask, I have the two different strap concepts, and now what I want to do is try it on. So I'm going to try the mask on, and I'll start with this side here where it's a tie situation. So I try the mask on, then I want to come around, bring the two pieces together and pinch behind the ear. So I want to make sure that it's secure, that it feels like the mask is going to be secure. Pinch behind the ear, and then I'm going to take the mask away and I'm going to have a look at where I was pinching. So where I was pinching there, I can put a mark there with a pin or with my invisible ink pen, disappearing ink pen I should say. And then I can either tie these two straps into a knot at this point, or what I could do is, holding on to the two marks that I've made, overlap the strap like so, and then just stitch back and forth a few times and then just trim off these loose bits. Now for the other side, I'm going to put the mask on, bring the strap around behind the ear, and then see at what length the strap needs to be to come in and meet the front bottom edge of the mask again. So once I've got that, I'd put a pin in. So I did this one already, so I've got a pin in there, which you can see. So I have a pin in marking that. Now what I'm going to do with this side is I'm going to overlap with that little 1/4 inch extension. This came in quite useful actually. I'm going to overlap with that little 1/4 inch extension, and then I'm just going to finish. I'll go back and forth with a stitch just to hold it in place, then I'll cut away that excess, and then if I want to just finish off and make it look a little bit neater where the raw edge is, I can do a zigzag to encase that raw edge. So I'm going to do that now for both sides and show you what it should look like. The first side that I'm doing, where it's going to join up behind the ear, I'm just going to overlap by a little bit. I've allowed myself about 3/8 of an inch overlap there. And then I'm going to go into my machine and stitch across that point. You want to make sure this is quite strong, so if you stitch across and then back stitch, and stitch across again, maybe 3 or 4 times. That should keep it really secure. Cut away those threads, and then those little raw edges that I mentioned before. So I'm just pointing that out now. You could do a zigzag if you want, just to encase that. You should be okay because it's bias. It's not going to fray as it would if it was straight grain. So that will just get like a little bit of a fluffy end eventually, but it shouldn't come undone. It shouldn't come apart and fray because it's on the bias grain of the fabric. So that's the first side. The second side, I'm just bringing it around and overlapping again in the same way slightly, but doing this at the front. And then I go into my machine. So once you get in the machine, just make sure that everything is aligned and is staying straight. It's a little bit more awkward, this one. Okay, so I went back and forth a few times on that one as well. Right, so there you have it. You've got the mask with the loops on both sides, and I'm going to try this on and show you what it looks like. Okay, so the moment of truth. So I've got my 2 loops. Loop behind the ears, and it's quite comfortable. So the trick here is going to be the fine balance between getting the length here. If it's too small, it's going to pull your ear forward and likely pop off. But if it's too loose, or too long, then it's just going to fall off. So you just need to work with it a little bit and do some adjustments before you start cutting into the straps. You don't want to make them, for instance, too short and then realize that you need to do an alteration. You've got nothing left to alter with. If they're too long, obviously that's a little bit easier to deal with that one. So there you have it, bias tape being used on a mask. Tune in next time, and we have got so much more to show you, and I'm really excited for you to see our upcoming videos. And remember, leave a comment down below. We love just to hear you say hi, and we love your suggestions. So whatever it is you want to tell us, pop down below, leave a comment. We're reading them, we see them, and we are starting to come up with ideas for you based on your suggestions. So speak to us. Okay, peace.